Since Battlefield Bad Company and the rise of the Frostbite engine, destruction has been a core component of what makes Battlefield Battlefield. Throughout all the subsequent games, we've seen a variety of destruction from large scale down to very minute levels, thinking more directly at 2042 and the recent game, where destruction was minimal to say the least. You very rarely saw any kind of open-ended destruction with large objects, buildings, etc. being significantly damaged and impacting play. Contrast this with Bad Company 2, for example, where whole buildings could be brought down, completely changing how you would approach objectives, or in fact taking out some objectives entirely. Looking ahead to the next Battlefield game in the next couple of years, I believe that DICE and the rest of the development teams need to put a significant focus back on destruction. For me and a large majority of the player base, destruction is really what makes Battlefield Battlefield. If we're looking to improve that, I've got a few points I wanted to suggest in terms of what I would like to see from the destruction mechanics and potentially what could be interesting to see in the next Battlefield game as the technology and the engine keeps on improving. First off, we definitely need to go back to a more widespread destruction model. Bad Company and Bad Company 2 wowed me when I first played them because of the level of destruction that you saw in those games, and the fact that it was all around player agency. You were the one who was actually involved in creating that destruction. Of course, we had things like Levolution in Battlefield 4, which were the large-scale set-piece destruction, which could be triggered by a player, but you didn't really have the same control over that as, for example, firing an RPG or a grenade launcher at a wall and blowing a hole in that you could then enter through. This needs to be commonplace in the next Battlefield game, again to bring back that level of player agency and to make us feel like our decisions on the battlefield really do have an impact on the environment around us. With that being said, obviously with the technology improving, I'd quite like to see a wider scope of environmental destruction as a whole, so perhaps large portions of the map, not just buildings but also terrain, could be destructible. For example, if aircraft are able to drop bombs in the next game, they can create huge landmass changes in the map itself. Along with this, it'd be great to see buildings and structures show progressive damage over time, like cracks, crumbling walls, or partial collapses, instead of just seeing the standard breakdown and the clear point at which it is then leveled. Video games like the Finals have certainly been doing this well, and I think DICE needs to take a page out of their book and implement that into the next game too. I mentioned already that in previous Battlefield games, destruction also had an impact on objective play. For example, in Rush in Bad Company 2, if you were to bring down the building that the MCOM was in, you would therefore actually take out the objective and you wouldn't have to plant the MCOM. I would personally love to see a return to this, with destruction actually impacting the gameplay, particularly objective gameplay, a lot more. So the ability to create or block paths through the destruction to make it feel that the player can have an impact on the objective, even if they aren't exactly pushing the objective directly. This would certainly open up a lot more playstyles for a wide variety of players, and equally an interesting entry point for new players who perhaps aren't used to the Battlefield style of objective play. They can still have that kind of impact and see the effects that they're having on the battle through the destruction that they're wreaking. This is a bit more of a niche suggestion now, and perhaps not going to be the best for someone who is a bit more of a casual arcade FPS player, but if you're someone who's more interested in the hardcore side of FPS, interactive debris that affects the player themselves could be an interesting approach. What I mean by this is having potentially falling rubble that can harm soldiers or block vehicles, and ultimately create a more fluid interaction with a lot of the destroyed elements that are going to be created on the map. Again, I'm not sure if that'll work too well, and personally I'm a lot more of an arcade player, so for me I'm not sure whether that is going to be the best move, but it would be nice to see that they've implemented these kind of systems into the game if there is an option to do so. Would I like to see the return of something like Levolution? Potentially, I'm not against it, although on some maps in Battlefield 4 I felt that the Levolution actually impeded my enjoyment of the maps. For example, Siege of Shanghai being the primary one of those, where bringing down the tower for me always actually ruined the flow of the game. I think the FPS landscape right now really stands out as devoid of these kind of elements, particularly around destruction. Like I mentioned, the Finals, obviously being made by ex-DICE developers, is really the only standout when it comes to destruction in an FPS title right now. This mantle certainly used to be held by the Battlefield franchise, and I want to see that return. With other games like Delta Force also trying to implement some level of destruction, I think DICE and the other development teams need to come out swinging with the next Battlefield game to make sure that they can retake that crown and show why Battlefield was so synonymous with destruction, and in my opinion was the best in class for this level of fidelity and visceral gameplay amplified by destructive elements. With that being said though, let me know down in the comments below what you want to see from the destruction destruction in the next Battlefield game. Whether you're happy with it staying at the kind of 2042 levels, or you want to see a return to the Bad Company days, I know which one I would definitely prefer. As always, a massive thank you for watching so far, and a big shout out to all of my members on Patreon, namely Curvy Mermaid, Bjorn and Spongy. With that being said, I appreciate your time, and I'll catch you all in the next one.